Okay, so let's get started with note 12 from CS70. This one is about self-reference and computability. So, let me just close all the drop-downs for a second. Okay, so the liar's paradox. So this statement is false. This is about the self-reference part of this note. So if this statement is true, then that means that its contents are true, which means that the statement is false, because that's what the statement is saying. But if the statement is false, then that means that it's true that this statement is false. So as you can see, there's sort of like this cyclic logic to this, where if it's false, then it's true, and if it's true, then it's false. And so that's sort of what makes it a paradox. Another example is the barber example. So there is one second. Yeah. Okay. There is a village where all men are clean shaven, and a man either shaves himself, or gets shaved by another, or gets shaved by the barber, right? And there's this proposition that the barber shaves all and only those who don't shave themselves. But if it's the case that the barber shaves himself, then he must not. He only shaves people who do not shave themselves, right? So, yeah. But then, if the barber does not shave himself, then that means he has to go to the barber to get shaved. But he is the barber, so yeah. So just kind of to sum up the significance of this, problems arise when a proposition references itself. So now we're going to move on to programs that replicate themselves. So I mean, this is just kind of an example that they really thoroughly spelled out, so I just kind of showed the last bit, which says we have this function, and it's really just written in pseudocode, where the first part says print out the following sentence twice, the second time in quotes. And this is the sentence that we want to do that. And as we can see, this output is identical to the function. And that is what a quine is, a program that prints itself. And I don't know why there's so much missing errors. Anyways. Yeah, so that's sort of, I guess, the recursion theorem. So given any program P with inputs X and Y, and some other program Q with that input X, we can say Q of X is equal to, we can break that into P such that we input X into P, but then we also input Q into P. And P's Y's now become the actual function. So what does that mean? Yeah, become this actual function. So yeah, I mean, I guess that's just another way of looking at it for recursion, but honestly this one isn't like super solid in my head. We're going to talk about the halting problem right now, and we're going to use this function called test halt, which is going to take in a program and an input. And something that we should realize, or I didn't even know this, is that a program is just a bit string, like integers and characters, or at least a computer just treats it as a bit string. So this function, test halt, is going to output yes if our program halts on input X, and no if it loops forever on input X. Because what we're trying to find is, we're trying to see if it's possible to determine whether or not a function will terminate or will loop forever. And Turing discovered that you can't compute this. There's no way to compute this. I.e., there does not exist a program, test halt, with the behavior specified on all inputs for P of P and X. So we're going to create this other function, which is kind of like taking test halt and giving it that self-referential nature. So we're going to assume that test halt exists, and we're going to say that this function, Turing, takes in some p, some program, and if test halts on the program such that it takes in itself as input, then we're going to, if it halts, meaning it returns yes, then Turing is going to loop forever. Otherwise, if the program technically loops forever, then we're going to halt, or return halt. So what happens when we pass Turing into Turing? So if input to the Turing halts, so if the Turing program halts, then that means that test halt should return yes, because Turing halts, right? But if this input Turing halts, then the output of test halt will be yes, and so the output of the overarching Turing, this one right here, will loop forever. So when we're trying to determine if this function Turing is looping forever or halting, we're going to find that when we put itself into Turing, we're not going to be able to determine that, because again, if we set Turing as a program that halts and we put it into Turing, we're going to find that it's going to loop forever. And then if we do the opposite, we're going to find that it halts. So it must be the case that this function test halt does not exist. Okay, and diagonalization, that's something we sort of looked at last video. So let's take this and assume that we have all programs, and we're just going to kind of enumerate them like so. P of n is going to represent the Turing program. And no matter what the value at the diagonal of P of n and P of n would be, whether that's halt or loop forever, test halt nor Turing can exist. Right? If P of n halts on P of n, then Turing must loop on P of n, and then vice versa, which is pretty much what we said up here. Now there's another way of looking at it called the easy halting problem, and basically what this does is just kind of puts it into terms that make it easier for us to grapple with. It's really saying the exact same thing, it's like easier for us to look at and therefore think about. So we're going to have this function, so we have this function test easy halt, which returns yes if our program P halts on input 0, and no if program P loops on input 0. And then we're going to have this overarching function, which is going to say construct some program P prime that when you input 0 into P prime, we return P of x. And so really this is just a roundabout way of kind of doing the exact thing that we did up here. So honestly, it's not really necessary to understand this, but it's like, for whatever input we have of P prime, it just turns into Px, right? So then we test easy halt on P of x. That's what ends up happening. Because we're just checking on inputs of 0 for P. And if we have test easy halt, then halt should solve the halt problem, but we know that halt does not solve the halt problem, so test easy halt fails. Yeah, it's just kind of saying the same thing in a different way, I guess. So, but I would say understand the halting problem, I guess the core halting problem first. Okay, and now we're going to talk about something called Gödel's incompleteness theorem. I hope I'm saying that right. Maybe I should look up the pronunciation, but I'm just going to kind of go with it. So, two things that we want to define in terms of like arithmetic. So, we want to know if arithmetic is both consistent and complete. in order for arithmetic to be consistent, it must be the case that if we have some proposition P, it can't be the case that P and not P is true. We sort of talked about that back in note, I guess 1 or 2, when we were just talking about logical operators. I think this is called the law of excluded middle. So if this is not the case for all P inside of arithmetic, then we can say that arithmetic is consistent. Now, how do we define if arithmetic is complete? That basically just means that every statement can be proved. So this person Gödel proved that arithmetic does not abide by the above two laws. So we're going to sort of sketch out what his proof looked like, and we're going to define F as some space that sufficiently expresses, or F is some expressive system that can represent arithmetic. So we're going to have this function that says this statement is not provable in F. Okay, so let's say in case 1, this function is provable. So if that's the case, then it means that this statement is true, but this statement is saying that it is not provable in F. So there's that inconsistency right there. But then if it's the case that S of F is not provable, then what the statement is saying is true, but that means that F is incomplete, right? Because in order for it to be provable, in order for it to be arithmetic to be, I keep saying things incorrectly. So case 1 proves that arithmetic is inconsistent, because we proved that if this is true, then this false statement is also true. In other words, we proved that P and not P are simultaneously true, which means that there is an inconsistency. The second case, where we assert that S of F is not provable, means that this internal statement right here is true. And if it's true that the statement is not provable in our system F, then it means, just by this definition, that arithmetic is not complete. Okay? And let's see. We're going to use the proof through the halting problem. So we're going to say that our statement is this. We're going to use some fixed P program and some input X, and we're going to say that P halts on X. Okay. And we're just going to say that this function can be written programmatically. Let's see. I honestly forget exactly what this is supposed to do. Let me just look at it really quick. Right, okay, so what we want to say is that we are asserting that P halts on some value X, and we want to create this statement that's basically like there exists some value that causes P to halt. And if we know that P halts, then we can programmatically find what that value is, essentially. Just randomly, like we could just test inputs. So let's check for consistency. It must be the case that only one of these is true. And then completeness is stating that there is a proof for one of these. But again, they cannot both be true. So there cannot be a proof for both of them. So we're going to use this function called search, which is going to take in some program and some input. And we're going to say for every possible proof, Q, if Q is a proof of this statement that halts on P, then output yes. If Q is a proof of, this statement the negation of this statement, then we're going to output no. So if we assume that all proofs, assuming all proofs can be written as binary strings and can therefore be enumerated, then search P of X should halt. But we know that the halting problem is impossible, so our assumption that arithmetic is consistent and complete must be false. Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty much what I got from this note. I don't really like this last statement. I think really what they want us to understand is that if we can put something into this form, if we can take our problem and make it take the form of halting or test halt, then because we know test halt is not possible, then we therefore know that our problem is not possible. And this was just another way of showing that, or an example of showing that. So that has been note 12 in CS70. This is about self-reference primarily, and then a little bit about computability.